time and perfect. I won't start again, hopefully. That's a
Good.
great presentation. Thanks everybody for joining. Yeah. um, it doesn't matter. The concept of planning is still there. So as I get into this, I'm going to introduce a theme. If any of you like reading interesting books, I've drawn a lot of insight out of The Alchemist as a book that has interesting messages that you can apply to business. I haven't actually run across anybody who else has used it for business purposes, but I have. So you can tell me maybe at the end whether or not I've done a good job with it. So let me just get into that and stop at any time, ask questions, answer comments, add your comments. I'd be happy to hear everybody's experiences in these areas. If I can, I'm just going to talk about myself just briefly, mostly because I don't believe I would be considered your typical board member, typical member of the board. But nonetheless, there's an interesting angle to the background I have that's relevant to the topic. So what I've done here, using all these multiple colors, and as per the presentation earlier in the week, I did not use AI to generate this. It's just a reflection of my personal career path. So I was one of those people early in the tech sector who came out from behind the shuttered doors of things people didn't understand to talk to customers because I could. And that sort of drew me out into a lot of the different business roles over the years in the technology sector, which is more or less my whole career, both business to consumer and business to business, although mostly business to business. And through that skill and through that, just general capability to communicate well, I wound up in a bunch of different roles over the years. So as I've gone forward in my career, it sort of led to some interesting opportunities, like when I founded my own business in 2003. I had all the experiences of all the roles at that point. So when I was sitting with my management team and we were talking about sales or marketing or whatever it was, I didn't have that challenge a lot of leaders have, which is they have to sort of trust more the people they're talking with and just take them for granted at the things that they say. Not that people are distrustful, but that doesn't make for an effective collaboration when you may actually have no idea what the other person is saying. And I'm sure everybody can appreciate in many market sectors, technology, I'm sure, is at the top of the list. It's very easy to not understand what somebody is saying. So trust isn't necessarily something you can rely on only. So I've gone on with my career. I've probably now, maybe I've been half full-time, half consulting, depending on what comes around. I've mostly gravitated towards business and product strategy type relationships with companies. Either take them on in leadership roles or take them on in consultative, mentoring, coaching type roles. And the themes are all the same everywhere I go. A business is a business. They all have the same problems. Their customers are all cycling through pretty common life cycles of solution usage. And obviously, I won't know a lot of the industries that the board is active in, but I'm also a consumer, so I see a lot of things as a consumer, and I've learned from it as much as I can. Had a little bit of luck in my career, had a nice business venture, became a very fast-growing company. I was a top number 2 company in Canada for 5 years, which is an odd position. I keep hesitating when I say that was actually true, and 12th in North America. So mostly it's just about lots of experiences. So what I find when I look at it from a business leadership perspective, it's an intersection of the experiences that give you a thriving business. So again, whether they're all in you or whether they're all in the team you work with, because everybody has the experiences, you should be able to get to the same place if you know how to interact well. So what I've used the Alchemist for is to call out why people fail in their businesses. There's a lot of adages in technology. I'm sure you may have heard many of these phrases. You start many technology businesses before you get a success. Investors, VCs used to have a 2 out of 10 model for a win, which is really spectacularly low for most things. They would invest in 10 companies, and 1 or 2 would sort of make the goals of the fund, and all the rest would be a wash. So they're churning pretty quickly on things. And while as an entrepreneur you start something new and you say, "Hey, I've got a VC there, isn't that great? It's an endorsement." It says, "No, you're just one of those 10. It's not really an endorsement yet. It's if you keep going with them, maybe it's an endorsement, but initially it's not." So businesses fail quite a bit, and often you can attribute it when you look backwards at the lack of really good understanding of how business planning works. So the phrase, what I'm going to draw out here is The Alchemist, and I again appreciate you could read it and say, gee, that's really weird. Steve would use that, but hopefully you'll see why I'm using it and in what way it provides the insight. So the insight lies in the theme of failing to pursue one's true purpose, which mostly means in crafting your business plan, it doesn't actually articulate what you're trying to do in a way that makes it actionable to get to a point of success. In The Alchemist, if you know that book, Paulo Coehlo is the author. It's a very, very well-known book worldwide, translated into, I don't know, 100 languages, read by scholars and leaders all over. It is mostly a book with a bit of a religious orientation around, believing in your faith and believing in the path through the universe to live your life. And it's told from the story of a shepherd who's traveling and dealing with his situations. So in The Alchemist, individuals are encouraged to follow what is called your personal legend, despite all the challenges and distractions, which of course in the business world more or less means keep your head down and stay focused on what you need to focus on. Businesses falter when they lose that focus on that core mission and they neglect that original vision that started, or they prioritize short-term gains over long-term value creation. I find the last point, prioritizing those gains over long-term value creation, is where most people falter. You get really caught up in the day-to-day of your business opportunity, and it starts corrupting what you originally were trying to pursue. So you wind up making wrong choices, not knowing that they're wrong, and then later trying to recover from them. In the tech sector, this is very, very pervasive. It's so common to trade off the short term for the long term because it's very hard to think about the long term. I think that's true of all businesses, but in tech, it's harder. So it's very, very easy, given there are so many choices to solve a problem. Many of them are not good ones, but until you have the after experience of looking backwards and say why that wasn't a good choice, it's not always obvious as you go forward that it is. I like one of the interesting analogies for me is when you talk to companies about metrics, which is big in all industries. Why do you have metrics? Well, because I'm asked to, or because I'm going to get paid by how they measure and all that, on and on and on. But that's actually not why you have them. You have them, and the analogy is I'm about to go on a big hike. I know I need to get to the other end because that's where my ride is going to be to take me back. And I don't have a map. So the only way I'm going to make it to the other end is if I have a bunch of markers along the way. And even if I have written instructions, I'm very unlikely to follow them. So I have to have those markers. They have to tell me I'm in the right place at the right time, heading in the right direction in order to know I'm going to get to the next marker. And my way of thinking of metrics is that's what they are. So I use that analogy a lot in talking to people, given it sort of takes them out of their business sense and puts them into something hopefully they can relate to. So businesses falter when they lose focus on their vision. And the last one is it highlights the importance of staying true to the purpose that you've set out for yourself to achieve your meaningful success. And we'll expand on that. So I'm not going to belabor the subtlety of it. Your business plan is the guiding thing for you. And the one hard phrase I make, and I think it's on the next slide, people were not meant to run businesses, plans were meant to run the business. And I say that for a lot of different reasons. If you've been involved in scaling businesses, beyond just yourself, it's pretty obvious that it gets harder and harder and harder really, really quickly to kind of manage a group of people and get them all to row in the same direction. But if that group truly understands what it is you're trying to do, in that they have a plan, however you've communicated it, and they understand what you're trying to do, they can operate kind of on their own to go in the direction you want to go to. So what you're trying to do, in the way I phrase this, is you're trying to take the challenge of managing people away from you and put it into the details of the business plan. And if you do that in the right way, then you're not having to micromanage the activities of the group. You may have project plans. It's not saying you don't have that, but you're not personally managing every single day. So when you get to larger organizations, when I was building this business Platespin, we got to 225 people. It wasn't possible for us to operate this way. We couldn't rely on our managers to manage all the people. We need to have our plan out there to manage all the people because you can't talk to everybody every day and figure out what they're doing. It was just not practical. So I try and remind people that a well-crafted business plan goes a long way to keeping people aligned. Most companies don't have a business plan that reflects, strangely enough, assuming success will happen. And there's lots of interesting examples that come into play today. I don't know if everybody's followed the impact of the election on X and a new platform, which I think is called Blue Sky.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So there was an interesting interview on CNN with the Blue Sky CEO, obviously an emerging successful female entrepreneur. She's now onto an opportunity for herself, so-called initially the 15 minutes of opportunity people get to, capitalize on an event that she probably had no control over. So the really interesting part for her business plan is, was she actually planning to be successful? Meaning, was she building this platform under the possibility that it would scale the way it now is? In the interview, whatever, 2 weeks ago after the election, she mentioned that they're signing up 1 million users a day. Now, I'm a technology guy. If I suddenly had 1 million users show up to almost anything I built, I'd freak out. I would not have been ready for that. Having said that, my current experience says, well, if I didn't think that I could handle that, why would I build a platform to start with? It is a social media platform. You don't do that for 100 people. You do that because you want to conquer the world, presumably. So there has to be a business plan that was built for success underneath everything she's done, or it would have collapsed long ago. So I like that without knowing the answer to that question. I like that she has built a plan for being successful. Most of the time, it's very easy when you talk to somebody about their business planning. You could find places where they clearly aren't prepared for success. And the most obvious one is ask them if they met their customer goals tomorrow, would they be able to survive that wonderful moment? And most people would say, no, I don't have enough manufactured goods. I don't have any infrastructure. My website's not ready. I didn't really worry. I didn't get pricing worked out on a global scale yet. I don't have my e-commerce site functioning perfectly. It's not scaled and tested, on and on and on. Well, then you're not ready for success. You have to think about, my goal is something I'm going to reach. I'm going to get to the other end of the forest and get to the car that drives me back to my home. If I'm not assuming that, why would I bother proceeding? So you want to work backwards from that goal, plan for your business to be successful, and make sure you're articulating all the challenges you have to go through to achieve that level of success, so that when it happens, and if you go into the Alchemist in detail, I'll use a sort of a crude phrase here, you don't sort of fuck it up at the finish line, which is pretty common for a lot of businesses that have that success happen unexpectedly. Business planning, and I'm sure everybody's been part of this, a lot of it is often treated as necessary evil by the team. And I say at all levels, because I've experienced working with many CEOs who also treat business planning as like an annual paper production for the board. Sorry, their board, not our board, their board. And therefore, they just placate the template that they're supposed to placate to. And then once they get through the board meeting, they put it away in a file, and it almost never surfaces again. So again, they've missed the chance to have a very effective company. I'll give you another analogy for me in my own business. I learned pretty quickly that your board, your investors, can be friends and enemies pretty quickly. The best way to make them enemies is to not keep them informed. The best way to make them friends is to keep them informed. The more informed they are, the more they're able to make thoughtful decisions about the challenges you have to take on in your business. The worst experiences I ever had was you go into a board meeting and you're asking for something, and you haven't met with the board, let's say every 3 months. Monthly is more common, but let's say every 3 months. And you have to remind them what you do first. So if you have to remind them what you do, it's very hard to say, and I want $500,000 to spend on this, because all the nuances are lost. There's no chance they're going to do anything other than be conservative in how they answer. But again, if the business plan was out there the way it should be, they would have what they need to be able to make articulate decisions around helping you as you go. So the job of the business leader, in the way I've looked at this, is to help the business find its personal legend, which is your path to success, and address 4 obstacles that are portrayed in the Alchemist, which I'm going to go through next. And basically the output of that, if you do it well, is you're gifting a strong business plan to your team. So next few slides are going to go through these 4 points. And that more or less makes up the presentation, so it'd be great to engage in some dialogue at that point and tell me whether you find this useful in any way. So this one, this is a broad one. I love this one the most. I would say it's had the most impact on me as a parent as well. And I've thought a lot about how to sort of portray it in my discussions with teams when I'm doing mostly my consulting, but just in general. So in the book, it talks a lot about how you're told from a very young age, everything we want to do is impossible. And I thought about that initially as a parent, where we have three boys, and how when we raised our first boy, everything was about what you can't do, the simple things, and they're accurate. You can't touch the stove when it's hot. You can't cross the street without looking. You need your helmet when you're riding your bike. Those are all accurate. But I realized how often I portrayed it in a negative way. And I developed or was I risk developing a mindset in my oldest son that you couldn't do anything because there was always risks that were there to go get you if you tried. Now, you could deal with all those things in positive ways, but as a parent, I grew up in a negative way. In my business, my line of business, this is the biggest problem most companies have, is it's very, very easy to say no. It's a lot harder to say yes. And most people, and the way I've internalized this, most people share experiences through negative orientations. So when you're in meetings and people are raising a point and someone wants to participate and show that they can, be there with you on that issue, they normally want to share an experience, which is to point out the risk. Now, it is important to point out risks, but not from the perspective of dissuading somebody from pursuing the idea they're trying to raise, which is where the obstacle happens. You end up getting involved with a group and you're having a discussion about something new you want to do, and all everybody's saying is why you can't do it, or including we're not ready for it. So those are all valid points to make, but eventually they sort of beat down the interest in presenting ideas because you have to first get through all the negativity that most people have. So in The Alchemist, that's basically your first obstacle in life, or first obstacle in business, is how you build the right culture. So we grow up with this constraint, building layers of prejudice, fear, and guilt about the things we're trying to do. It becomes ingrained behavior that drives key aspect of business culture and team dynamics. And it's very obvious. I'm sure everybody has examples of this, both at a personal level as well as in business, about how business culture is often very negative. If you studied Stephen Covey's Speed of Trust, or I forgot his first name, Leone's Five Dysfunctions of a Team, a lot of it has to do with these kinds of issues. You have to turn the mindset around of the way teams work in order to create positive cultures, which sort of opens up and releases the opportunity to run faster through your path to get to the point of success. Failures are at the start of discussions about innovation, problem solving, and stretch goal setting. Failure discussions are about risk management and pivoting, where signs of business maturity often lie. So it's important to have a moment where you say, what if this doesn't work, but not as the basis of first deciding if you're going to try. If you're going to try, then you want to say, how do we understand how to walk through the forest, given all these risks are out there? It becomes nighttime, we can't see. What do we do? That's okay, but I'm in the forest now. I am trying to get to the other side. So therefore, we need lights, or we need better directions, or we stop and sleep, or we have to carry bear spray, or whatever it is. You get to that later in the cycle, not at the beginning. So when people are in meetings, initially just always saying why you can't, let's for the moment assume we're going to do this, and we'll come back to the risk factors later, but let's see where it gets us by continuing to assume we are going to do this, and what are the things we need to account for in defining what it is we're going to do and how we're going to get there. So these failure discussions, as I say in the last point here, are not supposed to be the main intercourse during everyday business interactions. They're supposed to be a stage you go through in your business planning. So that's the first point. There's 4 of them, and I'll just go on. I don't know if anybody wants to pause and ask questions or comment or share something, or I can just plow through this so we can do it afterwards. Okay.
There we go.
Let's go.
It's going. It's good.
Sure, thanks. So knowing something is impossible is an attribute of experience and should be shared with positive tones. And, that was my takeaway here. Oh, yes, I forgot about this one. So this actually wasn't originally in my presentation, but it happened to come to me on a Facebook post about a week ago. So it's a quote from Steve Jobs, or a quote about Steve Jobs. And I actually found the corresponding quote this originally came from, which was, I guess he made a commencement speech at Stanford University in around 2005. And basically it says, I'll just sort of, if you want to try and read it there, the ability to make new combinations depends on our ability to see relationships. That's what makes some people more creative, the ability to see relationships. They are better at spotting those connections, better at recognizing possible relationships. They're able to do this because they had more experiences or thought more about those experiences than other people. They are better at connecting the dots. This is the key phrase to me, because they have more dots to connect. right? Which is really what experience is. You have more dots to connect if you have
Yeah.
experience. So whether you have it or your team collectively has it, it shouldn't matter. It often does, but it shouldn't matter. But without the dots, you're guessing. And it's very, very difficult in a lot of sectors to come in with all the natural intuitive talent you need to make decisions if you've never done anything before. And again, in technology, that's obviously very paramount. So most
Mm.
people haven't had diverse experiences. They may know a lot, but only about a very narrow field, so they don't have enough dots to connect. I really like that one. It's very apropos for so many things that I've
That's when he relates to studying calligraphy or taking calligraphy classes at Reed, right? Like I
uh,
think,
well, not in the commencement speech. It's still a variation of this one, but yes, it's similar to that one.
yeah. Oh, it's a different one. Okay. Yeah, like
Yeah.
it kind of relates for me, those two things. It's like
Yeah,
doing something completely different, and yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. I find for me the yeah, the concept of the plan, really is if somebody can get somewhere fast, you don't want them to kind of idle. They need to know where to go. So the more you can provide the dots along the way, the more they know what to do on their own, and you kind of develop trust within your team. When I was building Platespin and we got to the 225, we never lost that nimble culture. And in technology, nimbleness is again probably true in many industries, but in tech, nimbleness is the winning principle of successful businesses because things change so fast. Look at AI as an example.
Yeah.
It's spinning change in a way more dramatic way than almost any innovation since the spreadsheet, I would argue, came into play because it impacts every role. It's one of the first technologies in decades that actually impacts every role. There are many that have impacted technology overall, like cloud computing, but they didn't affect the finance guy and they didn't affect the executive assistant. But AI affects everybody, which
Yeah.
is what the spreadsheet did. So it's very, very interesting as things are going to now move even faster in certain areas. And I thought some of the demos that happened a couple of days ago in the All Things AI presentation, were very illuminating. Even for me, with all my experience, I'm just not trying to do some of the things that were there because of what I do, but I'm doing very deeply some of the other things like generating code or generating, business plans or metric documents or KPIs or whatever.
Well, I think it's also so interesting in the consulting space, right? That's the idea of a nimble talent being able to kind of pulse in when you need it, as opposed to, someone who's there and you just keep adding more to what they're expected to do, right? And
Yeah,
it's the winning, to me, it's like a competitive edge from that perspective. And
yeah,
it's the seasoned talent who has more experience and more dots to connect, right? And so it kind
yeah.
of speaks to both of those things.
Yeah, and I find April, I'm not sure, what your experiences are. It's not that easy sometimes to find people who appreciate it's even possible to do what you're saying. That you
Mhm.
come in and you say something, and as I have said with teams sometimes, okay, we just had a meeting for an hour. Did anybody realize that, 5 minutes in, the answer to the problem we're discussing actually surfaced, but nobody had the ability to recognize it? And I'll
Mhm.
facilitate meetings that way. So you go round and round and round and round the merry-go-round on the topic, but because nobody recognized that you might stand out with more dots, therefore what you say is probably more the right answer than what the other person says. We don't accept that. The easy examples are if we're talking about some medical issue and there's a doctor in the audience, by definition you're going to listen to them with a more authoritative ear. For whatever reason, that doesn't need to happen in business the same way because maybe there's fewer titles like that, like doctor, lawyer, whatever they may be. So it's not clear that what they say means anything different than somebody else. Sometimes I find, April, I'll say something so matter of factly, but it's the answer. But I
Yeah.
forget to express it in a way that leads people to the same conclusions. I have to go back and change the way they're thinking about something to put them in the mindset of coming to the same
Right. So
conclusion.
it sinks in. Well, I think that's also the difference of tech culture, right? There's that kind of stakeholder mentality versus many other, I think beauty, fashion, it's very much a hierarchied, the more senior person. But you're seeing that shift with, the nimble, the digital first group
Yep.
coming in, and then the, more over 50 crowd who is like they're trying to that multi-generational piece of where both are needed, right? You need those years of experience and networks and decades of trying it, fucking it up, fixing it, trying it again, versus someone really new to the scene who has a completely new perspective and way of doing, and somehow it's matching those on a team perspective, as well as, again, with seasoned leadership coming in or agencies stepping in or whatever it may be.
Right.
It's interesting to think about how you get to get to the decisions from this perspective.
Right. So in business planning, I always, sort of get critical of companies who forget to include the people issues in their business plan. Like your goal has to be to improve your team. I'm
Yeah.
obviously going to be a sci-fi nerd. Pretty famous line out of an old Star Trek movie around, improving technology, improve man by 10%, but if you improve man, you improve everything by 1,000%. So the same thing's true in business. If you can do anything to improve your team, it'll have a dramatic effect across everything you do. So don't forget that when you do your business planning, is you have to also include improving the team, whether it's the way you hire, the way you work, the processes, whatever it is. You have to do something to keep improving the team. Otherwise, it stagnates and then becomes a burden over time as it grows.
Yeah.
So it's very, very interesting. So let me just get through the other three here. They're a little less dramatic than the first one, which is about negativity. We're afraid to hurt those around us by abandoning everything to pursue a dream. So this one is in the book. It talks more about family relationships, and if you take the example of a couple where one member is trying to start a business and the other member is now always at home alone. It's that kind of example that the person who's trying to engage in the venture eventually pulls back because they realize there's a risk in that relationship and it's not playing out the way it should. Whereas what the book says is, yeah, you forget that the people around you who love you, again, I'm getting off business here for a sec, they want you to be successful. So actually, they're there to support you more. But if you don't engage them and include them in what's going on, there's no chance for that. Just like my board analogy, they're not prepped into doing what's doing. You come home, you have nobody to talk to because you haven't brought them along the journey. So you have to bring them along the journey. So in the team scenario, it's almost the same sort of thing. If I go ahead and get this big customer, it's going to just mean everybody's got to work overtime, and I just can't do that to people, so I won't pursue that in the same way. But they've come to be part of a successful business, so they need to be on that journey of what it means to be prepared for a big successful customer or a big customer to improve the business success. So you're really not trying to hurt everybody, but if you don't bring them along the journey, it's very difficult to do anything other than appear to be creating some issues and friction between the people you work with. So we don't realize that those that love us want us to be happy and are prepared to accompany us on the journey. In my world, I would say, again, communication is key to any success, as each team member should be coached to never be shy about what insight they may have or what ignorance they may have to the matters at hand. And both of these are interesting ones in my mind, especially on the ignorance side. I don't know how many times people start by saying, I know my opinion may not be relevant, but and I always say it's actually very relevant, because if you actually don't understand what it is we're doing, I want you to understand it so that next time we can have a better conversation. So don't be shy in telling me I don't get this, or it sounds too silly. You guys are all too senior, and I don't think I should comment. Like the more you can reveal in the speed of trust theme, the more you reveal how it is you think, the more the people around you can decide to what level they can trust you to do the right things. And if they're good managers, they'll work with you to improve what you know so that they can trust you more, in which case the autonomy gets stronger, in which case you get to your goals faster because you're not having to micromanage them anymore. The more aligned everyone is with goals, which is a bit of an obvious statement, what they need to know and how to get to them, the more the organization operates with the speed of trust. I wouldn't say I'm dogmatic about a lot of these themes that some of these books have, but there are some 10,000 foot view points that they make. And I really like the speed of trust one, just purely on raising the issue of how you learn to develop trust with the people around you, which mostly means you've created the right environment such that they can make the right decisions just like you can. And once that happens, they gain independence to pursue the goal with whatever speed they can operate at, without you having to worry about too much risk along the way. You still have to check in, and you have to have measures and other guardrails in place, but you don't have to have a daily stand-up, every day for 30 minutes where everybody goes around saying what they're doing. Like that kind of stuff sometimes is necessary, but most of the time isn't. And it's an artifact of they don't really know what it is they should do, so they can't make their own decisions, and they have to review it with you. And now if you're not there that day, what happens? There's nobody to do it, so they go a whole day doing the wrong thing, and that's not what you want. The third, we fear defeats that will meet along the path. I think this starts to head more into real business commentary in the book. So taking on a business is a big thing, and suddenly it's a real thing, and suddenly you've got responsibilities. When I got my platesman business to a certain point, Now I'm responsible for families and their livelihood, and some of my workers are getting married and having kids and all this. So if I mess up the business because I take too much risk, they might all lose their jobs, and that weighs on you as a leader. So fearing the defeats while being aware of them is not the same as backing off from pursuing success. If you believe again in a lot of the historical studies of our industries, most of the businesses that had the potential for success and never achieved it often went the wrong way as they got closer to success, and they just didn't prepare properly, so they failed altogether. If you read Crossing the Chasm, it's an old book from the 90s, but Geoffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm, he talks a lot about when you enter a market, if your goal is to be the market leader, that's completely different than saying I'm going to be a market leader. If you want to be the market leader, you have to invest in a different way than if you're just going to be a shared market leader. And if you fail at being the market leader, he argues in his book that you normally come last, which means go out of business. You don't normally come second. Trying to compete to be a market leader doesn't normally get you to first. I would argue, just in the public domain, people competing with SpaceX is a great example. If someone's trying to become the #1 space venture company today, they're probably going to blow it. They've got to find the niche to establish themselves in. It's going to be very hard to compete with SpaceX directly. And if they fail, like have a disastrous mission, they're likely to go out of business altogether, right? Which almost happened with the Boeing Starliner not too long ago. We suffer more than others when it doesn't work out. We must have tremendous patience in difficult times. We must uncover how the universe is conspiring to help us. So the last part of this, uncovering how the universe is conspiring to help us, to me talks about the metrics and KPI world, which is, oops, I'll back up slightly, which is what I found is it's very often the case that if you listen to your opportunity in the right way, if you engage your clients, engage your markets, look at the competitors, see what's going on, and just keep your ears and eyes open in the right way, normally the indicators of what to do surface. And if you create a culture where you can go through all that correctly and recognize those, then you tend to make the right choices and you go forward. If you don't bother to sort of listen how the universe is conspiring to help you, then you're guessing. And that's not typically going to work out very well for people, even if they have lots of experience. Although obviously it can work out depending on what it is. I'm not sure I entirely believe in this one, but it's from the book. The secret is to fall 7 times and be strong enough to get up to 8 times. I don't remember why 7 and 8 were the numbers anymore, but in technology, the VC example applies here because they'll invest in 10 to get 2 winners. But in a business, you don't often get to fail too many times and still survive because of the financial issues. But there's a dividing line in my world between whether you're trying to pursue this from an innovation perspective or whether you're trying to pursue this to satisfy a defined customer need that a customer is telling you. In the innovation perspective, sometimes you do need to sort of try, fail, adjust. But I would argue, again, you don't have the right people around the table, or you're too much on the bleeding edge that there's not any way to get any evidence to figure out what to do. So that is the only way to do it. And again, I think SpaceX probably lives in this motto. If you remember when their first attempts, blew up, they were the fun creators of the phrase spontaneous disassembly as a better way of saying boom. So they learned, right? And then they were up there two months later. Now, of course, it helped that Elon Musk had hundreds of billions of dollars to put into it, so he could afford that model, but most people can't. So you got to learn from your experiences and decide, what's going to happen. Winning teams need to demonstrate resilience and perseverance in the face of challenge. I place a high premium on pivotability and nimbleness. If we meet today and we decide to go do something, and then we meet 2 weeks later and we decide to change our minds, I don't want anybody to get frustrated by that. Now, if I do that every 2 weeks, of course, eventually everybody gets tired, including me. But the idea that something may have impacted the way we think about things, and we're not willing to deal with it just because we 3 weeks ago said we were going to do something else, that's nonsense in most cases. And in today's world, everything moves so fast. It's very, very important to be nimble. And even more so, although it doesn't talk about this here that much, if you don't meet your market opportunity window, then the nimbleness factor becomes even more important, because most decisions about what to do in a given time frame, like I'm sure April, lots of stories here, when you're trying to release a new product, if you miss your window, you probably also miss the assumptions that window was used to create, in which case it's not relevant to try anymore if you miss it by long enough. We have a personal example in the COVID era. One of my wife's friends wanted to build a big business around building hand sanitizer that was fragrant friendly for people and dealt with dry skin better than most. So she went through many of the steps, but it was such a long process. By the time she got product approved and manufactured and everything else, most of COVID had slipped away on her. So the timing of her idea, while probably really good to make a killing, ended up going nowhere and went bankrupt for that because it just missed that window. So, that was an important one where you really have to be, you have to persevere through the challenges and pivot rapidly. And then the last one is we fear sort of getting there. So, being part of a successful business can be pretty dominating on many of the people in the team. The possibility of realization fills us with guilt. My gosh, I'm so busy. So many who have tried have failed. We feel unworthy of success. What I find I mostly take out is this one: we commit stupid mistakes near the end, never reaching our goal. We're prepared to renounce joy and conquest and just walk away. This one largely has to do with people realizing they actually have customers now and they weren't really prepared for that, or the obstacles of global distribution, or managing or the importance of technology in their business. They create a poor website or it performs poorly or whatever, and now they're getting mired in all of the issues of those first few interactions with the market are now going to bring them down because it's disproportionately distracting them. I now have my first 100 customers and 80 of them are unhappy because I really wasn't ready for them anyways. So I gave them something that was ill prepared. And now I'm about to be successful because if I had 100 successful customers, I could parlay that into 1,000. But now I can't. I have to first spend my time doing the 80, in which case my market window starts shifting. And I sort of spiral down into the opposite of the 80-20 rule, which is most of my time and money and effort is going into the wrong end of that. And I'm not advancing as fast. And there's, again, many examples there. This one's a bit cyclical in that, businesses go through cycles where they have their invention, they put their solution into the market, they come around, that solution space gets well solved, and they don't iterate correctly out of whatever the next problem is. In Canada, BlackBerry was a classic example, perfected the messaging device, better than everybody, but then didn't do anything about it afterwards. So they changed the nature of the market, provided a perfect solution for so many people, especially in business, but they didn't pay any attention to, once that problem was solved, where's that problem space going to move to? So it moved to software and all the things you could do with software on that kind of device, and they just ignored all of that, and then they got succumbed by Apple. So that's a great example where you fail near the end, just as they could have forever been the dominant phone going forward if they had understood what they needed to transition into, and they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So achieving success is an ongoing achievement, so you can never take your eye off the ball. Every trip around home plate heads you back to bat to try and hit again, so you can run the bases again. And best businesses go round and round and round. When I ran PlateSpin, we came to market with basically a single feature, and we built our initial business success around being the best in the world at doing that single feature. But our best achievement was we created two more things afterwards using good principles of business management, whereas the original problem came out of living the problem. Like a lot of people who start businesses, it's out of their own personal experiences living the problem. So as a business, we were more proud of, we created a second market leading product and then a third market leading product. And then, of course, the momentum of the first one ended up having a great impact on how fast we were able to grow as a result of that. So it's an ongoing cycle, power of business planning, and making sure your business plans become the secret to sort of all of this. So basically, that's my deck. I'm happy to pause here on 40 minutes of Stephen talking. I'd love to hear from everybody because it's a different audience than I'm used to at some level. So it'd be great to hear what you think of all this and whether it's useful, and happy to contribute any of this insight to any of your individual situations. Should you find that useful.
That's so good. I think all of us who've come from running teams and companies that are now independents, right? I think we think less about our own personal business plan for our consultancy, potentially in the way that, we're probably month to month building our businesses. And so it's interesting to your thoughts on that type of an application, right? We still all need to have some goals and some direction, for ourselves, but we're also kind of figuring out these new parameters when we're no longer, part of a team in that same traditional sense. And so when we kind of pulse into companies for specific projects, or some cases you're on for a year, but in many cases it's 3 to 6 months. And so there's a kind of a two-sided way to think about, on a client, how you're leaning into their business plan and what you're contributing there, and then on your own business as as an independent contractor, how you're mapping out 2025. And so I don't know if you have any insights on either of those.
I'd come back to a point I think you brought up a bit earlier, April. When I step in for myself in an engagement, my goal mostly is I want to be recognized as I could have the right answer, so we can get faster through things. And I find some of this is an angle by which people will see somebody they haven't seen before. Like, this is an interesting person. They have a set of insights that make total sense to me, and I will bequeath to them, the responsibility for helping us using this kind of orientation. So therefore, you more quickly get to the point of being able to share your actual experiences with the real problem they've hired you for, without as many hesitances from the rest of the team, where now they're challenging you because they think they know more than you. That's just not the relevant issue.
Yeah.
I'm trying to help you be successful with what you're doing, and so I come at it at that point of view. From my own for my own business as a consultant, I'm not sure I have a great answer, to be honest. My space, like a lot of them, is filled with referenceable leads and things. I just don't have to do much to generate business. I don't mean to say that arrogantly, because I'm not. But there's always another company out there that needs people, and I just sort of go at it from that perspective. I do try and publish a lot. So the InsideSpin name is a website of which I have a lot of articles on it about the technology sector, and there's a bunch of subtle, fun things in there. Actually, if you don't mind, I'll just share a kind of a funny story. So if you look at my gray hairs, I'll come out of the era where there was of the documentation era. So I remember talking once with VP of marketing I worked with. Why do we write these manuals for our products? Nobody reads them. I ship out my product in the old days in a big box, and it would have, a floppy in it or a CD or something like that. And it would have, 5 manuals, each an inch thick. And I know nobody reads them. Wouldn't it be great if we published the pages only as they asked for them? So somehow if we knew what page they were trying to get to, we would, ship it to them really quickly. So obviously that was just a theoretical discussion, hypothetical discussion. So later on, when I built my website, I thought, I'm going to try that. So what I did was, if you ever look at it, sorry, that didn't sound right. I apologize. For those people that look at it, there are many article summaries, but not a lot of full articles. But you don't know that until you go off the summary to go to the full article. And what the website does is it tracks statistics on that. And then when enough people click through the abstract to get to the full article, it tells me they're interested in the whole thing. I go ahead and write it. Otherwise, I'm just writing a bunch of stuff that I have no idea whether anybody's interested in. So I kind of proved that out for myself. So I have a sloping down curve that, these are really popular and these are less popular, and I just leave them as the summaries. And I've never had to write that 1-inch book. I've only written, a 1/4-inch book. So I found that was kind of interesting for well, what do I want to say? The world, the way it works today, which is very much, in the moment, real time, and just needs to respond to those things. And nimbleness is everything, and that's very important.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Does anyone have any planning hacks on your business?
I don't have any hacks, but I have a thought to share, because just the book that you mentioned, and thank you for this. It was interesting to follow along. I guess this is kind of like a hack, but the hero's journey framework is something that I kind of lean on, and it's obvious like that the book follows that, and I think Joseph Campbell may have like created it in, I think maybe the 60s or the 70s. But it's also like to your point around the just being more faith oriented. It kind of leans heavily on myths and things like that. So I did sort of try to create something like that for an entrepreneur's journey, and that's what I sort of use. It does kind of get like meta in a way where you're like always referencing like where is this client at? Who am I in their journey? Am I Yoda? What does that look like? So yeah, that was interesting. Have you ever looked at it from that kind of framework or that lens?
From the hero's journey lens.
Yeah, like
Uh,
planning in general, or like
yeah,
forecasting.
yeah. I think I want to say yes to that. For whatever reason, what popped up in my head is I was sort of a founding member, although that's overstated, of the Outliers Club, if you know that, TOP. Anyways, so their first annual event, I met a former Navy SEAL who left and had lots of physical injuries as a result of some, war trauma, and went on to, I think, try and craft what I've understood to be a bit of the hero's journey, the way you've described it, but through his lens of being someone in the military. I can't remember his name anymore, but it was very fascinating to hear how he's used his experiences in that kind of world to apply them to what he does now post being in the military in terms of all of his business endeavors. And we shared a few stories at that time, but they were all based on all the same concepts. And whether you bring a religious overtone to it or not doesn't really matter. To me, faith is faith in your ideas. It doesn't have to be faith in anything else. It can be faith in whatever you like. But I've learned, at least in technology, and Steve, and I'm sure you see this a lot, almost every technology idea can be successful, but it so rarely is, because there's so many places you can mess up along the way if you don't know how to do all the things that you need to do. And the person with the idea, who typically is a programmer, is like the last person who understands business typically. So they just make a lot of false assumptions, and they start pursuing them all, and then they get nowhere, and they go back and get a job. So I get sad when I see that, because our industry needs way better technology than it has. And I think AI is going to be interesting in that it'll wash away a lot of the crap technology that's out there, and hopefully replace it with something maybe a little more normalized than we want. Like, too many people do the same thing because they're using AI to generate their direction, but with common language models. But it may end up being an extra blessing, assuming we don't let it run away and turn into something really bad. But it's a good example where, and I think this came up yesterday or 2 days ago, when you're thinking about how to solve problems, in April, I think you commented on this, if I remember correctly, learning to treat it as though it's on your business team was like the mindset that I enjoy the most. I've just learned to talk to the GPT thing as though it's on my team, one of my people with a lot of dots of experience, almost an infinite set of dots.
Yeah.
I just keep throwing out feedback. I just want feedback, right? And what's the most lonely thing a leader has typically is there's nobody to talk to get feedback, right? You can't
Yeah.
go to your investors. Like when I was at
No.
Playtime, I couldn't go to my investors safely, because if I was
What
going to
should I
talk
do?
about a risk, yeah, if I was going to talk about a risk decision, I could
Yeah.
blow it with them, and they could say to the board, "Hey, Steve thinks the business is going to fall apart." And my team typically same reason, right? I don't want to create panic, so I talk to my wife and my kids.
Yeah. This is why I always had this idea to build a mini board for CEOs where we can curate from our community that real safe space, Switzerland, but a thought partner in that way. Do all you guys on this call, do you use ChatGPT? Are you guys we had our AI meeting, which was so great, and unfortunately they didn't record it this week, which kind of blew my mind around how Marsha's using it for marketing and marketing content. Like, Steve, didn't you think that was crazy? Her whole,
It was unbelievable. Yeah, it was at the level of depth I hadn't thought about. When that meeting was over, I went immediately to it and started to expand my
same. I went immediately to ChatGPT and started to map out content and try to ask it different questions. And it is something that I love for the board, is really like, we have incredible people that are really future thinking, and a lot of us, are experimenting in our own ways. But this idea of like, as we're all learning this, which is what this last week of, Steve presenting, Masha and Tim, what they're seeing and doing in this space and what they've already like rolled off of, what they've already found to be not worth it, what they've already found to be better. And that's when you see, you know, these monthly meetings of people that are deep in it and what they're learning, and how I was like, how can I use this for the board? Why am I not using AI to help, you know, with talent matching, with help business development? And so this nimbleness, but this shared knowledge piece is what I think we all really benefit from this community. And there's just so much knowledge here, right? And it's to your point of like connecting the dots. And so between all of us and all the dots we can connect, it's kind of crazy. And it's trying to find the right facilitation of that. But it's moving so fast. And that's what I was telling you guys that watched this, listen to a podcast, Brene Brown with Amy Webb, who's a futurist, and was talking about how we are now the T generation. So none of us, there's X, Y, Z. It's like we're all T, because we're in this transformation generation that over the next 50 years is going to do, you know, unlike anything else in anyone's lifetime have experienced with what's happening in AI and, you know, biotech and everything that's happening at the same time. It's as if the steam engine, the internet, the phone, electricity all happened at the same time. And that's what we're all living through and will live through for the next 50 years, right? And so it's just so fascinating. And I love this perspective of faith, right? Of like, we have to kind of believe we're going where we're, you know, supposed to be going, hopefully. But all the things that we're using and leveraging to do that across, you know, collective thought. And I think that's what's really so needed right now, as everyone's experiences can be so valuable to each other, right?
You know, I need the school system to keep up. That's
Yeah.
where I'm worried the most. You know, the 50 years could end up being 10, which wouldn't shock me at all, at least in terms of how it impacts the business world. But if the school systems don't adapt to, you know, a different way to have students learn, because you could argue almost anything you'd be asked in class now, from, you know, kindergarten all the way through to post-university, could be answered by ChatGPT. So how do you learn instead? And
I
when you get to
totally
business,
agree.
when you get to business, you know, why would I pay somebody to have learned that if I could pay somebody to just know how to use the tool properly?
Totally.
So where do we go next? You know, it's like,
I talk about all the time with like critical thinking, right? Like that's what we all need to have the most, you know, be the most adept at with everything that's changing.
Yeah. Goes back to my Wrath of Khan quote from Star Trek.
Totally.
We have to improve man. And then there's some interesting realities there, which also I bring into my business discussions. You know, you have this sort of short-term, long-term memory challenge with people, and people think through problems with those same characteristics. So there'll be some threshold for which AI can't allow us to move faster than the inherent way our brain works. So it's one thing to say we can generate 100 ideas today, but that's not going to be relevant because it takes time for them to cook and mature in your head, to digest them and internalize them, unless we solve that problem some other way. But anyways, I love it. I was very impressed when I saw the AI stuff this week, mostly because I've had no reason to ever go explore it that way, and I didn't realize it was all that rich. My middle son's in tech, but he's also a digital graphics designer, and game maker. So he uses the imaging and video side a lot for AI, and he sends out stuff like, "Oh, like, oh, that's pretty cool." It's accelerated his ability to do what he does dramatically.
I'm sure. Yeah, this Amy was saying the jobs of the future are, you know, biology and robotics, you know, are the things that you know, ChatGPT can't take totally over. Coding obviously can, like all the world. It used to be like coding was the future, you know. So it's so interesting and crazy. But this was really cool. Thank you, you know, for this perspective. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks everybody for your time. And as I say, you know, I'm online as much as I can be, so feel free to reach out at any time. And if I can help, happy to help.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Bye,
Take care.
all.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.